Chapter 11 of Building a Railroad by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11. Sealed Lips. Springing to his feet and taking Nellie in his arms, Don hurried outside. He soon found a pool of rainwater, with which he began to bathe the girl's face copiously, while he alternately chafed her hands and wrists. This rude method of bringing an unconscious person to their senses fortunately speedily prevailed in this instance, and Nellie opened her eyes.
"Don Winthrop?"
she murmured.
"Yes, Nellie. You are safe, are you not?"
she said eagerly.
"Yes, thanks to you. Now you must tell me how you came to be here on Jumbo Island, a mile from the cliff where you live. I can't understand how a blind girl like you could reach this spot all by yourself, and it looks to me as if you knew I was in trouble, and that you came over to aid me." "Yes," she said with a shudder. "I had reason to believe your life was in danger. I overheard Mr. Kelso and two Italians, named Gulla and Rossi, plan to cut you off this afternoon when you came out to the men you have on the side of the hill where you are making the cut. Your movements have been watched for days. They had a boat in waiting to take you to the island after dark. I heard Mr. Kelso tell the others how he meant to rig the nitroglycerin trap so as to add acute torture to your last hours, while at the same time this would remove every trace of the terrible crime they contemplated." "The scoundrel!" muttered Don. "No one could ever guess what I have suffered since this awful scheme impressed itself upon my mind. I was locked in my room. Indeed, I have not been allowed to leave the house since that afternoon Mr. Kelso discovered us together at the foot of the cliff." "Did the rascal dare ill-treat you on his return to the cottage that day?" "He swore at and threatened me, and ordered Mother Kelso to lock me up and never let me out of her sight when I was not in my room. Thank goodness he's abused you for the last time. This job will place him, as well as his confederates, including his precious son, where they won't be able to trouble the community for some time to come. Go on, Nellie." "This afternoon was selected because it was gloomy and threatened rain. Mr. Kelso said it would just suit his purpose. At 4 o'clock, Gulla, who had been on the watch somewhere along the path which runs around the hills near the lake, came to the cottage and told Mr. Kelso that you had come out and was talking to the foreman of the gang of workmen. The 3 men, accompanied by Jerry, immediately left the house, and then I knew you were in great danger. As it became darker and started to rain, I grew desperate at the thought of the peril you were facing. I believe it was largely because of the interest you had shown in me that Mr. Kelso had come to hate you. It was impossible for me to get out of the room by way of the door. Even had I been able to do that, I should have been caught by Mother Kelso. At last I could stand the strain no longer. I opened the window and managed to push myself through, dropping to the ground. I then made my way to the foot of the cliff, clambered over the rocks on the edge of the lake, and ran as fast as I could to the house of Widow Miggs, who lives on the lake shore nearly a mile from the cliff. I knew she owned a boat and was friendly to me. She readily agreed to let her son row me over to this island when I explained that it was of the utmost importance. The chance that Mr. Kelso and his companions were perhaps on the island at the moment of our arrival was a risk I had to face. I could only depend on Willie's watchfulness and my own sense of hearing. Willie guided me to the quarries, and I tried this one first, leaving him at the entrance to watch. I shudder to think that you might have come in just at the time to share my fate. Do you realize the awful risk you ran to save me? Do you understand that the matter of 10 minutes would have made all the difference in the world? Such courage as you, a mere girl and blind at that, have exhibited fairly staggers me, and I'm almost a stranger to you." "No, not a stranger," she said, placing her hand on his arm. "Don't say that," she added with an earnestness almost mournful in its intensity. "Have you not brought all this trouble on yourself because you interfered on my behalf? I would rather have died here with you than not have made this effort to defeat the terrible purpose of those wicked men." "Nellie," said Don with great emotion, "what you have done for me tonight is quite beyond me ever to repay. You have won my lifelong gratitude as well as that of my mother and brother. You shall come to my mother's house and live with us." "I cannot," she cried with a little cry of despair. "Cannot? What do you mean?" Don't you know that this attempted crime on the part of Jim Kelso will land both him and his son in the state prison for a long term? As to Mother Kelso, as you call her, you surely would not wish to return and experience further abuse at her hands."
Nellie buried her face in her hands and sobbed bitterly.
"I must go back," she said piteously. "I must."
Don looked at her in astonishment.
"Look here, Nellie. What's at the bottom of your connection with these Kelsos?" "Please don't ask me," she replied pleadingly. "But I want to know," he insisted. "If ever a girl needed a good friend and protector, I think you do at this moment. You have just saved my life, and the least I can do in return is to save you from influences that have hitherto surrounded you. With Jim Kelso and his son out of the way, what have you to fear? Mrs. Kelso could not make you return to her against your will. My mother, my brother, and myself will protect you against any harm or trouble if you'll only make your home with us in the future." "I'm very grateful to you, Don Winthrop," she answered. "It would make me very happy if I could accept your offer, but what?" asked the young engineer impatiently as she paused. "I cannot. I must go back to Mother Kelso, no matter what happens to Mr. Kelso."
She raised her tear-dimmed eyes, which had no sign of blindness in them, to his face, and her lips quivered.
"I must not,"
she answered in a tone which left him no hope of unraveling through her the secret which he could not fathom.
"Nellie, you cannot guess how this answer of yours pains me," he said sadly.
She took his hands confidingly in hers.
"Do not be angry with me," she pleaded. "I have a good reason for my silence. Another's life depends on it." "Another's life?" repeated the boy in surprise. "Yes, one I love dearer than all else in this world. My father."
She bowed her head in her hands, and the tears flowed freely.
"There, do not question me further. Let us go from here. Mr. Kelso may be on the watch, and not hearing the explosion, he may return to see what is the matter. Should he do so and find us on the island, we could hardly escape him. Don't fear for me, Nellie. Now that my hands are free, I warrant you that Jim Kelso and his cowardly Italians would think twice before tackling me. He had a lesson himself that he hasn't forgotten."
At the entrance to the quarry they found young Miggs, who was 13 years old, seated upon a rock with his face cocked toward the beach. They embarked in the boy's boat, and in 20 minutes Nellie and Don were landed at the foot of the cliff, while the boy rowed homeward.
"I hate to part with you, dear little girl," said Don, "but depend on it, I will see you soon again. I will never feel satisfied until I have rescued you from the clutches of the Kelsos."
Then, yielding to a sudden impulse, he took her face between his hands and kissed her lips. She uttered a little cry, and springing away, disappeared in the darkness. End of chapter 11.